You know, on Halloween, we love to tell stories of ghosts and ghouls, right? We talk about monsters hiding in the dark. We dress up, we have fun, we delight in a good scare. But sometimes the line between a festive fright and real-life terror gets really, really blurry, and the horror becomes all too real.
It's a simple warning, isn't it? But it carries this heavy weight, because behind all the masks and the make-believe, genuine danger can be waiting.
So, we're going to dive into some of the most chilling, the most tragic, and honestly, some of the most bizarre incidents that have turned the spookiest night of the year into an absolute nightmare.
Okay, so let's start with those urban legends. You know, the ones we whisper about around campfires. The kind of story you think, nah, that could never actually happen. Except, sometimes they do.
All right, so take the Bunnyman legend. In Fairfax County, Virginia, locals tell these tales about an escaped asylum patient in a rabbit suit. But get this isn't just folklore. Back in October of 1970, real-life reports started flooding in. A couple's car window was shattered by a hatchet thrown by a man in a bunny suit. Then, 2 weeks later, a security guard was threatened with an axe by the very same figure. They never found out who the Bunnyman was, which just completely blurs that line between a creepy story and a documented real-world threat.
So, from urban legends that turned out to be true, we move to maybe the most enduring fear of Halloween: poisoned candy. It's a paranoia that feels like it should be a myth, but its modern roots, well, they trace back to one truly monstrous act.
Yeah, back in 1974, a man named Ronald O'Brien from Deer Park, Texas, earned himself this sinister nickname. On the surface, he was just a dad taking his kids trick-or-treating, but underneath that facade was a calculated, cold-blooded, and absolutely horrific plan.
So the story O'Brien told was that he got these giant pixie sticks from a house where the lights were off, which is already a little weird, right? He gave them to his 2 kids and a few others. Later that night, he helped his 8-year-old son Timothy eat the candy. It tasted bitter, so Timothy washed it down with some Kool-Aid. He died that night. And the very next morning, what's the first call O'Brien makes? To his life insurance company.
And look, the case against him was just overwhelming. He was drowning in debt. He'd recently taken out these massive life insurance policies on his kids. He'd even asked a college professor about poisons that were even deadlier than cyanide. And the homeowner he tried to pin it on, that guy had a rock-solid alibi. O'Brien was found guilty and sentenced to death, but the fear that he created, that would linger for decades.
And you'd think that would be the end of it, but the fear O'Brien created, it just stuck around. It resurfaced decades later, in Minneapolis in 2000. Some teenagers found needles in their Snickers bars, and they traced them back to a 49-year-old man. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt, but it was proof, absolute proof, that the Candyman nightmare wasn't just some one-time thing.
But, you know, the danger isn't always hiding in the candy bag. Sometimes, the evil is standing right on your doorstep, hiding behind that familiar trick-or-treat.
In 1982, a man named Marvin Brandland answered a late knock. He found a man in a pillowcase mask demanding money at gunpoint. When Marvin resisted, he was shot and killed. They never caught the killer. Then there's a more recent story, a really creepy one. A man knocks on a door late at night and just asks, "Are you alone?" He left, but the next day, an elderly woman who lived nearby was found murdered.
You know, the horror of Halloween isn't always about malice, though. Sometimes it's about ambition and just a horrible miscalculation. That was definitely the case for Joseph Burris, a magician who called himself the Amazing Joe. On Halloween in 1990, he tried to pull off his most dangerous stunt ever.
7 tons. Can you even imagine? That's the estimated weight of the soil and wet cement they poured on top of the coffin Joe was chained up inside. He was trying to escape, just like his hero Houdini. But the coffin, it just wasn't strong enough. It collapsed, and he was crushed instantly. And in this incredibly tragic twist of fate, both Houdini and the Amazing Joe ended up losing their lives on Halloween.
All right, so we've talked about documented crimes. Now let's venture into something else. Stories that just defy any easy explanation. Tales from the deep woods and lonely roads that leave you with way more questions than answers.
Okay, this story from Lake Vermilion, Minnesota, it is pure nightmare fuel. A group of friends are out on this remote island. First, they hear a loud splash in the lake. Then, they see it, a face in the water. Pale skin, matted black hair, just staring at them. They freak out and run inside, but later they hear footsteps walking up to the cabin. One of them peeks out the window and sees that same terrifying face peering back in. They fled that night and never went back, with no idea what it was they saw.
And it's not just that one story. There are these other encounters that are just as bizarre. I'm talking reports of burglars caught on security cameras who just vanish into thin air, with no trace of how they got out. Or this hiker's story of being stalked through the woods by a tall figure, whose only warning was the constant, eerie ringing of a bell.
And how about this one? A group of teenagers explore an abandoned cottage. Inside, it's filled with chains and strange symbols. They look up and see an old woman just watching them from a window. They run, obviously, but days later, one of them sees the exact same woman standing outside his house, watching him from the woodshed. It's like some things can actually follow you home. Chilling.
Okay, we're going to end with what is, without a doubt, the most heartbreaking story of them all. This is a tragedy born not from malice, not from the supernatural, but from a simple, fatal misunderstanding on a night that's supposed to be all about make-believe.
His name was Yoshihiro Hattori. He was just 16 years old, an exchange student from Japan, and by all accounts, just full of life. On Halloween night, he and his friend were looking for a party. They were given an address, but in the dark, they made a mistake. They knocked on the wrong door.
And those were his last words. Cheerful. Innocent. He was just a kid looking for a party. The homeowner, a man named Rodney Piers, opened the door holding a massive .44 Magnum. Yoshihiro, probably thinking the gun was just part of a Halloween costume, smiled and walked towards him.
Piers yelled freeze, but Yoshihiro, who maybe didn't understand, just kept walking. A single shot was fired, and the unarmed 16-year-old was killed. The whole thing sparked this huge international outrage, especially when Rodney Piers was acquitted of manslaughter. His lawyer successfully argued that he was just a scared homeowner acting in self-defense against this unfamiliar person on his doorstep. And really, that's the question that hangs over all of these stories, isn't it? On Halloween, the lines get so blurred. A costume could be a costume, or it could be a disguise. A knock on the door could be a kid asking for candy, or it could be something far, far more sinister. And that, right there, is the ultimate horror of the holiday, that terrifying uncertainty of knowing what's real and what's not.